Chapter 1. The Quiet Village of Little Whimsy. The village of Little Whimsy was the sort of place where time seemed to stand still. Nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling green hills, it was a picture of tranquility, a place where the church bells rang on time. The postman knew everyone by name, and the most exciting event of the year was the annual flower show. But beneath its serene surface, Little Whimsy harboured secrets, and secrets, as Hercule Poirot knew all too well, had a way of bubbling to the surface. Poirot had come to Little Whimsy for a holiday, seeking respite from the bustle of London. He had rented a small cottage on the edge of the village, its garden bursting with roses and lavender. The villagers had greeted him with polite curiosity, though few recognized the famous detective. To them he was simply a peculiar little man with an impeccable moustache and a penchant for order. On his first evening in the village, Poirot strolled down the cobbled high street, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The butcher's shop displayed a row of plump sausages, the bakery wafted the scent of fresh bread, and the pub, the Merry Shepherd, buzzed with the low hum of conversation. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary, yet Poirot felt a faint unease, as if the village were holding its breath. His attention was drawn to the church, a grand stone structure with a towering spire that dominated the skyline. It was there, outside, the vicarage that he first saw her, Mrs. Abigail Finch, the vicar's housekeeper. She was a stout woman with a no-nonsense demeanour, but her face was pale, her hands clutching a handkerchief tightly. "Monsieur Poirot," she called out, her voice trembling. "Thank goodness you're here. It's the vicar. He's gone." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Gone, madame? What do you mean?" "He didn't come down for breakfast this morning," she explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I went to his study and he wasn't there. His bed hadn't been slept in, and his coat and hat are still by the door. He's vanished." Poirot's moustache twitched with interest. A missing vicar in a quiet village. This was no ordinary disappearance. "Calm yourself, madam," he said gently. "Tell me everything. When did you last see him?" "Last night, after evening prayers," she replied. "He seemed distracted, as if something were troubling him, but he said nothing to me." "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you must help us find him." Poirot nodded, his mind already racing. "Lead me to the vicarage, madam. We shall begin our investigation at once." As they walked, Poirot's keen eyes noted the curious glances of the villagers. A missing vicar was no small matter in a place like Little Whimsy. By the time they reached the vicarage, a small crowd had gathered, murmuring among themselves. Poirot ignored them, focusing instead on the task at hand. The vicarage was a modest home, its walls lined with bookshelves and religious artifacts. Poirot stepped into the study, his gaze sweeping the room. The desk was cluttered with papers, a half-finished sermon lying atop the pile. A Bible lay open to Psalm 23, a single sentence underlined, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." Poirot's eyes narrowed. A clue or a coincidence? He turned to Mrs. Finch. Did the vicar have any enemies? Anyone who might wish him harm? She hesitated, then shook her head. Everyone loved him. He was kind, generous, but lately he seemed troubled. He spent hours in the chapel praying. I thought it was just the weight of his duties, but now... Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "We shall see, madame. For now, I must examine the chapel. Please, do not touch anything in this room." As he left the vicarage, Poirot felt the weight of the village's gaze upon him. Little Whimsy was no longer the quiet, idyllic place it had seemed. Beneath its surface lay a mystery, and Hercule Poirot was determined to unravel it. Chapter 2. The Vicar's Last Sermon. The morning of the vicar's disappearance had begun like any other Sunday in Little Whimsy. The church bells rang out across the village, calling the faithful to service. The villagers filed into St. Michael's Chapel, their Sunday best neatly pressed, their faces serene. But as they took their seats, an air of unease settled over the congregation. Something was different. The vicar, Reverend Alistair Whitcomb, stood at the pulpit, his usual warm smile replaced by a furrowed brow. His hands gripped the edges of the lectern, his knuckles white. The villagers exchanged glances, whispers rippling, through the pews. Reverend Whitcomb was a man of unwavering composure, yet today he seemed unsettled. "Dear friends," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "we gather here today not only to worship, but to reflect on the shadows that linger in our hearts. For even in the light of God's grace, darkness finds a way to creep in." The congregation shifted uncomfortably. This was not the uplifting sermon they had come to expect. Mrs. Abigail Finch, seated in the front row, clutched her hymn book tightly, her eyes fixed on the vicar. Beside her, Mr. Harold Grimes, the church organist, frowned, his fingers tapping nervously on the pew. Reverend Whitcomb continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "There are secrets among us," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Secrets that fester and grow, poisoning the soul. I urge you, my friends, to confront these shadows before they consume you." A murmur spread through the chapel. Mrs. Finch leaned over to Mr. Grimes. "What's gotten into him?" she whispered. Mr. Grimes shook his head, his expression grim. The vicar's sermon grew more intense, his words laced with urgency. "There is one among us who walks in darkness," he declared, his voice rising. "One who has strayed from the path of righteousness. I beg of you, repent before it is too late." The congregation sat in stunned silence. Reverend Whitcomb's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for someone, or something. Then, abruptly, he stopped. His shoulders slumped, and he leaned heavily on the pulpit. "Forgive me," he said softly. I must pray for guidance." He stepped down from the pulpit and retreated to the vestry, leaving the congregation in confusion. The organist struck up a hymn, but the music did little to ease the tension. As the villagers filed out of the chapel, their whispers grew louder. "Did you see the way he looked at us?" one woman asked. "It's as if he knew something terrible," another replied. "Do you think he was talking about someone here?" a man muttered. Mrs. Finch lingered behind, her heart heavy with worry. She approached the vestry and knocked gently on the door. "Reverend Whitcomb," she called, "are you all right?" There was no answer. She pushed the door open cautiously, only to find the room empty. The vicar's robe lay draped over a chair, his Bible open on the desk. A single sentence was underlined, the ink still fresh. "The truth will set you free." Mrs. Finch's breath caught in her throat. She hurried out of the chapel, her mind racing. Where had he gone? And why had he spoken so cryptically during his sermon? That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, the villagers gathered at the Merry Shepherd, their conversations hushed and anxious. The vicar's strange behaviour was the talk of the town. Some speculated that he had been under great stress, while others whispered of darker possibilities. Hercule Poirot, seated at a corner table with a cup of tea, listened intently to the murmurs around him. His sharp eyes noted every detail. The nervous glances, the furtive whispers, the way Mr. Grimes avoided eye contact with the others. This was no ordinary Sunday in Little Whimsy. Something was amiss, and Poirot was determined to uncover the truth. As the clock struck 9, Mrs. Finch burst into the pub, her face pale. "He's gone!" she cried. "The vicar! He's vanished!" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Poirot, who set down his teacup and rose to his feet. "Madame," he said calmly, "lead me to the vicarage. We shall begin our investigation at once." Chapter 3. The Empty Vicarage. The vicarage stood at the edge of the churchyard, its ivy-covered walls bathed in the pale glow of the moon. Hercule Poirot approached the house with measured steps, his sharp eyes taking in every detail: the neatly trimmed hedges, the faint scuff marks on the doorstep, the curtains drawn tightly across the windows. Mrs. Finch fumbled with the keys, her hands trembling as she unlocked the door. "I haven't touched anything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought it best to wait for you." "Très bien, madame," Poirot replied, stepping inside. The air was heavy, with the scent of old wood and beeswax, a faint trace of incense lingering in the hallway. He removed his gloves and placed them neatly in his pocket, his gaze sweeping the room. The vicarage was a modest home, its furnishings simple but well kept. A grandfather clock ticked softly in the corner, its hands frozen at 11:45. Poirot's eyebrows rose. "The clock, madam. Has it stopped?" Mrs. Finch nodded. "Yes, it's been like that since yesterday. I meant to wind it, but with everything that's happened—" Poirot made a mental note and moved into the study. The room was cluttered, with books and papers, a half-finished sermon lying on the desk. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the neatly written lines. The sermon was filled with references to sin and redemption, but one passage stood out. "There are those among us who wear the mask of piety, yet their hearts are filled with darkness. Beware, for the wolf often hides in sheep's clothing." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Tell me, madame, did the vicar often speak of such themes?" Mrs. Finch hesitated. "Not usually. He was always so kind, so gentle. But lately he seemed troubled. He spent hours in the chapel praying. I thought it was just the weight of his duties, but now—" Poirot nodded and turned his attention to the desk. A Bible lay open to Psalm 23, the same passage underlined. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." Beside it was a small notebook, its pages filled with cryptic notes and symbols. Poirot flipped through it, his brow furrowing. "What is this, madam?" he asked, holding up the notebook. Mrs. Finch shook her head. "I've never seen it before. The vicar was a private man. He didn't share much about his personal thoughts." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. He set the notebook aside and examined the rest of the room. A faint smudge on the windowsill caught his attention, a partial footprint, barely visible. He knelt down, his magnifying glass in hand, and studied it closely. "Someone entered or exited through this window," he murmured. "Recently." Mrs. Finch gasped. "Do you think the vicar was taken?" "It is too soon to say, madam," Poirot replied, "but it is clear that this is no ordinary disappearance." He moved to the vicar's bedroom, where the bed lay neatly made, untouched. A coat and hat hung by the door, just as Mrs. Finch had described. Poirot opened the wardrobe and examined its contents. Rows of neatly pressed suits, a pair of polished shoes, and a small wooden box tucked away in the corner. He opened the box and found a collection of letters, their edges yellowed with age. The topmost letter was addressed to Reverend Alistair Whitcomb, the handwriting elegant but unfamiliar. Poirot scanned the contents, his expression growing more intrigued by the moment. "Madam," he said, turning to Mrs. Finch, "did the vicar ever speak of his life before coming to Little Whimsey?" She shook her head. "No, he never spoke of it. He arrived here 10 years ago, and that was that. He was a good man, Monsieur Poirot. I can't imagine why anyone would want to harm him." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Every man has a past, madame, and sometimes the past has a way of catching up to us." He tucked the letters into his pocket and returned to the study, his mind racing. The stopped clock, the cryptic sermon, the hidden letters. Each piece of the puzzle hinted at a deeper mystery. But what connected them? And where was Reverend Whitcomb now? As Poirot prepared to leave the vicarage, his gaze fell on a small painting hanging above the fireplace. It depicted a serene countryside, but something about it seemed off. Unsolved stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. The brushstrokes were hurried, almost frantic, and in the corner of the painting was a tiny symbol, a circle with a cross inside. "Madame," he said, turning to Mrs. Finch, "do you recognize this symbol?" She shook her head. "No, I've never seen it before." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then it seems we have our first clue." Chapter 4. The Secretive Parishioners. The morning sun cast a golden glow over Little Whimsey, but the village was far from its usual cheerful self. The news of Reverend Whitcomb's disappearance had spread like wildfire, and the villagers moved about their day with hushed voices and furtive glances. Hercule Poirot, ever the observer, noted the tension in the air as he made his way to the Hey, Merry Shepherd, the village pub and the heart of local gossip. The pub was quiet, save for the low murmur of conversation and the occasional clink of glasses. Poirot took a seat at a corner table, his sharp eyes scanning the room. He had already compiled a list of key individuals to interview, each with their own connection to the vicar. First on his list was Mr. Harold Grimes, the church organist. Mr. Grimes was a thin, nervous man, with a perpetual frown, and fingers that seemed to twitch, even when they weren't hovering over the organ keys. He approached Poirot's table hesitantly, clutching a glass of ale. "Monsieur Grimes," Poirot began, gesturing for him to sit. "Thank you for speaking with me. I understand you were close to Reverend Whitcomb." Grimes nodded, his eyes darting around the room. "Yes, I've been the organist here for 15 years. Reverend Whitcomb was a good man." Poirot leaned forward slightly, and yet, during his last sermon, he seemed troubled. "Did you notice anything unusual about his behaviour?" Grimes hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "He'd been distracted lately, spending more time in the chapel, muttering to himself. I thought it was just the stress of his duties, but now—" "Now?" Poirot prompted. Grimes lowered his voice. "There were rumours about his past. I don't know the details, but I heard he wasn't always a vicar, that he came here to escape something." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Did he ever confide in you?" Grimes shook his head. "No, he kept to himself, but I think he was afraid of someone." Poirot made a mental note and thanked Grimes before moving on to his next interviewee, Miss Eleanor Hartley, the village schoolteacher. Miss Hartley was a prim woman in her 40s, her hair pulled into a tight bun and her glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. She greeted Poirot with a polite smile, though her eyes betrayed her unease. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, sitting across from him, "I hope I can be of help." "Indeed, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "You were present at Reverend Whitcomb's last sermon. Did you notice anything unusual?" Miss Hartley adjusted her glasses. "He seemed agitated. His words were cryptic, almost accusatory. It was unlike him." "Did he mention anyone specifically?" Poirot asked. She hesitated, not by name, but he spoke of the wolf in sheep's clothing. It made me wonder if he knew something about one of the villagers. Poirot nodded. "And what of your own relationship with the vicar? Were you close?" Miss Hartley's cheeks flushed slightly. "We were friends. He often visited the school to speak with the children. He was very kind." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet you seem troubled, mademoiselle. Is there something you wish to tell me?" She looked away, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It's nothing really, just a feeling that something terrible is about to happen." Poirot thanked her and moved on to his final interviewee of the day, Mr. Thomas Blythe, the reclusive artist who lived on the outskirts of the village. Blythe's cottage was a ramshackle building surrounded by overgrown gardens and half-finished sculptures. He greeted Poirot at the door with a scowl, his paint-stained hands clutching a palette. "What do you want?" Blythe demanded. "I am investigating the disappearance of Reverend Whitcomb." Poirot replied calmly. "I understand. You were acquainted with him." Blythe snorted. "Acquainted? Hardly. He came by once, trying to save my soul. I told him to leave me alone." "And did he?" Poirot asked. Blythe's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Only that Reverend Whitcomb was a persistent man. If he believed you were in need of guidance, he would not easily give up." Blythe hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. He came by a few times. We talked about art, about life. He wasn't so bad, I suppose. Did he ever mention being in danger?" Poirot pressed. Blythe shook his head. "No, but he did say something strange the last time I saw him. He said, 'The past has a way of catching up to us, whether we like it or not.'" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Indeed, thank you, monsieur. You have been most helpful." As Poirot left Blythe's cottage, his mind raced with the information he had gathered. The vicar's cryptic words, the rumours of his past, the nervous glances of the villagers. It all pointed to a deeper mystery. But what was the connection? And who among them was hiding the truth? Poirot's next stop was the chapel. If there were answers to be found, they would surely lie within its hallowed walls. Chapter 5. The Cryptic Clue in the Chapel. The chapel stood silent and solemn, its stained glass windows casting colourful patterns on the stone floor. Hercule Poirot stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of incense and old wood. He paused for a moment, his sharp eyes scanning the room, before moving toward the altar. The vicar's last sermon had been delivered here, and Poirot was certain that the chapel held clues to his disappearance. He began his search methodically, examining every detail: the worn pews, the dusty hymnals, the flickering candles. But it was the altar itself that drew his attention. Kneeling down, Poirot ran his fingers along the base of the altar. The wood was smooth, polished by years of use, but one section felt slightly uneven. He pressed gently, and to his surprise, a small compartment clicked open. Inside was a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. Poirot carefully unfolded it, his eyes narrowing as he read the contents. It was a letter, written in a hurried hand. To whoever finds this, the truth is buried where the light cannot reach. Seek the symbol of the cross within the circle, and you will find what you seek. Beware, the shadows are watching. Poirot's moustache twitched with interest. The symbol of the cross within the circle. It matched the one he had seen in the painting at the vicarage. But what did it mean? And where was it leading him? He turned his attention to the chapel walls, searching for any sign of the symbol. It wasn't long before he found it, a small carving hidden in the corner of a stained glass window. The cross within the circle was subtle, almost invisible, unless one knew to look for it. Poirot traced the symbol with his finger, his mind racing. "Where the light cannot reach," he murmured. "The crypt." The chapel crypt was accessible through a narrow staircase at the back of the building. Poirot descended the steps cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the dimly lit passage. The air grew colder as he reached the bottom, and the faint scent of damp stone filled his nostrils. The crypt was small, its walls lined with ancient tombs and crumbling statues. Poirot's eyes scanned the room, searching for anything out of place. It wasn't long before he noticed a section of the wall that seemed different from the rest. A faint outline of a door, nearly invisible in the shadows. He pressed his hand against the wall, and with a soft click, the hidden door swung open. Inside was a small chamber, its walls covered in strange symbols and diagrams. In the centre of the room stood a wooden chest, its surface carved with the same cross within a circle symbol. Poirot approached the chest and opened it carefully. Inside was a collection of old documents, a small vial of liquid, and a journal. He picked up the journal and flipped through its pages, his eyes widening as he read. The journal belonged to Reverend Whitcomb, and its contents were startling. It detailed a secret society that had existed in Little Whimsy for centuries, a group dedicated to protecting a hidden treasure buried somewhere in the village. The vicar had discovered their existence and had been trying to expose them, but his efforts had put him in grave danger. The final entry was dated the day before his disappearance. "They know what I have uncovered. I fear for my life, but I cannot remain silent. The truth must be revealed, no matter the cost. If I do not return, look to the symbol. It will guide you." Poirot closed the journal, his mind racing. The vicar's disappearance was no ordinary mystery. It was tied to a centuries-old secret, one that someone in the village was desperate to protect. As he left the crypt, Poirot's thoughts turned to the villagers he had interviewed. Who among them was part of this secret society? And what were they willing to do to keep their secrets buried? The shadows were indeed watching, but Hercule Poirot was not afraid of the dark. Chapter 6. The Midnight Visitor. The moon hung low over Little Whimsy, casting long shadows across the village. Hercule Poirot sat in the vicarage study, the journal and documents from the crypt spread out before him. The flickering light of a single lamp illuminated the room, its glow barely reaching the corners where darkness lingered. Poirot's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The secret society, the hidden treasure, the vicar's desperate warnings. It all pointed to a conspiracy far deeper than he had initially imagined. But one question remained. Who in the village was involved? As he pondered this, a faint sound broke the silence, a soft creak like a floorboard shifting underfoot. Poirot's head snapped up, his sharp eyes narrowing. He rose from his chair and moved to the window, peering out into the night. At first, he saw nothing. The garden was still, the churchyard bathed in silver moonlight. But then a shadow moved, figure slipping between the gravestones, heading toward the vicarage. Poirot's heart quickened. He extinguished the lamp and stepped into the hallway, his footsteps silent on the wooden floor. The front door was slightly ajar, and he could hear the faint rustle of fabric as the intruder entered. The figure moved cautiously, their footsteps light but deliberate. Poirot waited, his back pressed against the wall, until the intruder was within arm's reach. Then, with a swift motion, he stepped forward and grabbed their arm. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. "No." The figure gasped, struggling against his grip. In the dim light, Poirot could make out the face of a young woman, her eyes wide with fear, her dark hair falling in disarray around her shoulders. "Please," she whispered, "let me go. I mean no harm." Poirot studied her for a moment before releasing her arm. "Explain yourself, mademoiselle. What are you doing here?" The woman hesitated, her hands trembling as she clutched a small satchel to her chest. "My name is Clara Whitcomb," she said. "Reverend Whitcomb was my uncle." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Your uncle? Why have you not come forward before now?" Clara looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't. Not until I knew it was safe. My uncle sent me a letter, warning me to stay away. He said the village was dangerous, that there were people who would stop at book nothing to protect their secrets." Poirot gestured for her to sit, his expression softening. "Tell me everything, mademoiselle. Your uncle's life may depend on it." Clara nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "My uncle discovered something about a secret society in Little Whimsy. They've been here for centuries, guarding a hidden treasure. He wanted to expose them, but they found out. That's why he disappeared." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Do you know who is involved?" Clara hesitated, then reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a list of names my uncle compiled. He believed these people were part of the society." Poirot took the list and scanned it quickly. Among the names were several villagers he had already interviewed: Mr. Harold Grimes, Miss Eleanor Hartley, and Mr. Thomas Blythe. But there was one name that stood out: Mrs. Abigail Finch. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The vicar's housekeeper. Had she been hiding her involvement all along? Before he could speak, a noise outside caught his attention: the sound of footsteps approaching the vicarage. Clara's eyes widened in fear. "They've found me," she whispered. "You have to hide." Poirot shook his head. "No, mademoiselle. We will face them together." The door burst open, and two figures stepped inside: Mr. Grimes and Mr. Blythe. Their faces were grim, their eyes filled with determination. "Monsieur Poirot," Grimes said, his voice cold, "you should not have meddled in matters that do not concern you." Poirot stood, his expression calm but resolute. "On the contrary, monsieur, it is my duty to uncover the truth, and I assure you I will not be deterred." Blythe stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't understand. This is bigger than you, bigger than the vicar. If you continue down this path, you'll regret it." Poirot's eyes gleamed with defiance. "Threats will not stop me, monsieur. The truth will come to light, no matter the cost." For a moment the room was tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. Then, with a curt nod, Grimes and Blythe turned and left, their footsteps fading into the night. Clara let out a shaky breath. "What do we do now?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Now, mademoiselle, we prepare for the final act. The stage is set, and the players are in place. It is time to bring this mystery to its conclusion." Chapter 7. The Vicar's Dark Past. The morning sun cast a pale light over Little Whimsey, but the village was far from peaceful. Hercule Poirot sat in the vicarage study. The list of names Clara had provided spread out before him. Each name represented a piece of the puzzle, but one in particular stood out: Mrs. Abigail Finch. The vicar's housekeeper had seemed so devoted, so innocent. But was it all an act? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Clara entered, her face pale but determined. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "I've remembered something. Something my uncle told me years ago." Poirot gestured for her to sit. "Please, mademoiselle, tell me everything." Clara took a deep breath. "Before he came to Little Whimsey, my uncle lived in London. He was a different man then, not a vicar, but a scholar. He studied ancient societies and secret orders, but something happened, something that forced him to leave everything behind." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Do you know what it was?" Clara shook her head. "He never told me the details, but he said it was a mistake, a terrible mistake that haunted him for years. When he came here, he thought he could start over, but I think the past caught up to him." Poirot leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The vicar's past was the key to the mystery. Of that he was certain. But how to uncover it? He turned to Clara. "Do you know where your uncle kept his personal belongings? Anything from his time in London?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "There's a trunk in the attic. He never let anyone touch it." Poirot rose to his feet. "Then let us examine it, mademoiselle. Time is of the essence." The attic was dim and dusty, filled with old furniture and forgotten relics. The trunk sat in the corner, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. Poirot opened it carefully, revealing a collection of books, papers, and photographs. Among the items was a faded photograph of a younger Reverend Whitcomb, standing with a group of men in academic robes. On the back was an inscription, "The Order of the Silver Cross, 1912. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "The Order of the Silver Cross," he murmured. "A secret society, perhaps?" He continued to sift through the trunk, uncovering letters and documents that painted a troubling picture. The Order of the Silver Cross was indeed a secret society, one dedicated to the study and preservation of ancient artifacts. But it was also a group shrouded in controversy, accused of theft, forgery, and even murder. One letter, in particular, caught Poirot's attention. It was addressed to Reverend Whitcomb, written in a shaky hand. "Alistair, you cannot escape what you have done. The Order will not rest until the artifact is returned. If you value your life, you will give it back. A friend." Poirot's moustache twitched. "It seems, mademoiselle, that your uncle was involved in something far more dangerous than we imagined." Clara's eyes widened. "What artifact? What are they talking about?" Poirot held up a small leather-bound journal. "This, I believe, will provide the answers." The journal was filled with notes and sketches, detailing an ancient artifact known as the Silver Reliquary. According to the journal, the reliquary was a priceless treasure said to hold immense power. Reverend Whitcomb had been entrusted with its safekeeping, but something had gone wrong. The reliquary had been stolen, and the Order had blamed him. Poirot closed the journal, his expression grim. "Your uncle was not just a victim, mademoiselle. He was a man with a secret, one that put him in grave danger." Clara's hands trembled as she spoke. Do you think the Order is here, in Little Whimsy?" Poirot nodded. "I believe so, and I believe they will stop at nothing to recover the reliquary." As they descended from the attic, Poirot's mind was already formulating a plan. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but one question remained. Where was the reliquary now? The answer, he suspected, lay with Mrs. Abigail Finch. Chapter 8. The False Confession. The vicarage kitchen was warm and inviting, the scent of freshly baked bread filling the air. Abigail Finch stood at the counter, her hands busy kneading dough, but her eyes betrayed her unease. She glanced up as Hercule Poirot entered, her smile strained. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can I do for you?" Poirot took a seat at the table, his expression calm but piercing. "Madam Finch, I must speak with you about Reverend Whitcomb's disappearance. There are certain inconsistencies that require clarification." Mrs. Finch hesitated, then sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Of course, I'll help in any way I can." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "You have been the vicar's housekeeper for many years, yes? You knew him well?" She nodded. "Yes, I did. He was a good man, Monsieur Poirot. I can't imagine why anyone would want to harm him. And yet," Poirot said, his voice soft but firm, "you have not been entirely truthful with me, madam." Mrs. Finch's eyes widened. I don't know what you mean." Poirot placed the list of names Clara had provided on the table, his finger resting on Mrs. Finch's name. This list suggests that you are connected to the Order of the Silver Cross. Is this true?" For a moment, Mrs. Finch was silent. Then, with a heavy sigh, she nodded. "Yes, I was a member many years ago, but I left the Order when I came to Little Whimsy. I wanted nothing more to do with their schemes." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet you remained close to Reverend Whitcomb. Did you know about his involvement with the Order?" She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "I suspected, but he never spoke of it. I thought he had left that life behind, just as I had." Poirot studied her carefully. "Madam Finch, I must ask you directly. Did you have any involvement in the vicar's disappearance?" Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head. "No, Monsieur Poirot. I would never harm him. He was my friend." Poirot's expression softened. "Then why did you not come forward with this information sooner?" Mrs. Finch hesitated, then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "Because of this," she said, handing it to Poirot. He unfolded the paper and read the contents, his eyebrows rising. It was a note, written in Reverend Whitcomb's hand. "Abigail, if anything happens to me, know that I have hidden the reliquary where only you can find it. Protect it at all costs. Alistair." Poirot looked up, his mind racing. "The reliquary. It is here, in Little Whimsy?" Mrs. Finch nodded. "Yes, but I don't know where. The vicar never told me." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Then we must find it, madam, before the Order does." As they spoke, a commotion erupted outside. Poirot rose to his feet and moved to the window, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. A group of villagers had gathered in the churchyard, their voices raised in anger. At the centre of the crowd was Mr. Harold Grimes, his face flushed with rage. "This is your fault," Grimes shouted, pointing at Poirot. "You've brought nothing but trouble to this village." Poirot stepped outside, his demeanour calm but resolute. "Monsieur Grimes, I assure you, my only intention is to uncover the truth." Grimes stepped forward, his fists clenched. The truth is that you're meddling in things you don't understand. Leave now, before it's too late." Poirot's gaze hardened. "I will not be deterred, monsieur. The truth will come to light, no matter the cost." Before Grimes could respond, a voice rang out from the crowd. "Enough!" All eyes turned to Miss Eleanor Hartley, who stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "This has gone on long enough," she said. "I can't keep silent any longer." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Mademoiselle Hartley, what do you mean?" Took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "I know where the reliquary is, and I know who took Reverend Whitcomb." The crowd fell silent, their attention fixed on Miss Hartley. Poirot stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Tell us, mademoiselle, what do you know?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with guilt. "It was me," she said. "I took the reliquary. And I helped the Order take Reverend Whitcomb." The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs, but Poirot held up a hand for silence. "Why, mademoiselle? Why would you do such a thing?" Tears streamed down her face as she spoke. "They threatened me. They said they would harm my family if I didn't cooperate. I didn't want to, but I had no choice." Poirot's expression softened. Where is the reliquary now? Miss Hartley pointed to the church. It's hidden in the crypt, beneath the altar. Poirot turned to the crowd. We must act quickly. The order will stop at nothing to recover the reliquary. The villagers dispersed. Poirot's mind raced. The mystery was far from over, but the pieces were finally falling into place. The final act was about to begin. Chapter 9. The Hidden Letter. The crypt beneath St. Michael's Chapel was cold and damp, its ancient walls lined with shadows. Hercule Poirot stood before the altar, his sharp eyes scanning the stone floor. Miss Hartley's confession had led him here, but the reliquary was nowhere to be seen. "It should be here," Miss Hartley said, her voice trembling. "I hid it, beneath the altar, just as they instructed." Poirot knelt down, running his fingers along the edge of the altar. The stone was smooth, but one section felt slightly uneven. He pressed gently, and with a soft click, a hidden compartment opened. Inside was a small, ornate box, the silver reliquary. Its surface was intricately carved with symbols, including the cross within the circle that Poirot had come to recognize. He lifted it carefully, his mind racing with questions. But there was something else in the compartment, a folded piece of parchment, sealed with wax. Poirot opened it and read the contents, his eyes widening with surprise. "To whoever finds this, the reliquary is not what it seems. It is a key to a greater secret. The true treasure lies where the light cannot reach, beneath the oldest tree in the churchyard. Beware, the Order is watching A. Whitcomb." Poirot's moustache twitched with interest. "The oldest tree in the churchyard," he murmured. "Of course." He turned to Miss Hartley, who stood nearby, her face pale with guilt. "Mademoiselle, you have been deceived. The reliquary is not the true treasure. It is merely a decoy." Miss Hartley's eyes widened. "A decoy? But why?" "To distract the Order," Poirot explained. "Reverend Whitcomb was far cleverer than they realized. He knew they would stop at nothing to recover the reliquary, so he used it to lead them astray." He handed her the letter. "The true treasure lies elsewhere, and I believe it holds the key to your uncle's disappearance." Miss Hartley's hands trembled as she read the letter. "What do we do now?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with determination. "Now, mademoiselle, we set a trap. The Order will come for the reliquary, and when they do, we will be ready." As they left the crypt, Poirot's mind was already formulating a plan. The oldest tree in the churchyard, a towering oak that stood near the chapel's entrance, was their next destination. But first, they needed to prepare. Back at the vicarage, Poirot gathered the villagers who could be trusted, Mrs. Finch, Clara, and a few others. He explained the situation, his voice calm but urgent. "The Order will come tonight," he said. "They will expect to find the reliquary in the crypt, but we will be waiting." Mrs. Finch nodded, her expression resolute. "What do you need us to do?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Simply follow my instructions. And remember, the truth is our greatest weapon." As night fell, the village of Little Whimsy grew quiet once more. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Poirot positioned himself near the crypt, his eyes fixed on the churchyard. The reliquary sat in plain sight, its silver surface glinting in the moonlight. Hours passed, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then, at last, a shadow moved. A figure slipping between the gravestones, heading toward the crypt. Poirot's heart quickened. The trap was set. The final act was about to begin. Chapter 10. The Final Revelation. The crypt was eerily silent, the air thick with anticipation. Hercule Poirot stood in the shadows, his sharp eyes fixed on the reliquary, which glinted faintly in the moonlight filtering through the chapel windows. Around him, the trusted villagers, Mrs. Finch, Clara, and a few others, waited in tense silence, their breaths shallow and their hearts pounding. The sound of footsteps echoed softly in the distance, growing louder as the figure approached. Poirot's hand tightened around the handle of his cane, his mind racing with the possibilities. Who would it be? Mr. Grimes? Mr. Blythe? Or perhaps someone entirely unexpected? The figure stepped into the crypt, their face obscured by a hooded cloak. They moved cautiously, their eyes darting around the room before settling on the reliquary. With a swift motion, they reached for it. "I would not do that if I were you," Poirot said, stepping into the light. The figure froze, then slowly turned to face him. The hood fell back, revealing the face of Miss Eleanor Hartley. Poirot's eyebrows rose, though his expression remained calm. "Mademoiselle Hartley," he said, "I must admit, I did not expect to see you here." Miss Hartley's face was pale. Her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I had no choice," she whispered. "They threatened me. They said they would harm my family if I didn't cooperate." Poirot nodded, his voice gentle but firm. "And yet you came here tonight." "Why?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Because I couldn't live with the guilt any more. I wanted to make things right." Poirot stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "Then tell me the truth, mademoiselle. Where is Reverend Whitcomb?" Miss Hartley's hands trembled as she spoke. "He's alive. The order took him to force him to reveal the location of the true treasure. But he refused. They're holding him in the old mill on the outskirts of the village." Poirot's eyes gleamed with triumph. "And the true treasure, what is it?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Reverend Whitcomb never told me, but he said it was something far more valuable than the reliquary." Poirot turned to Mrs. Finch and Clara, who had emerged from the shadows. "We must act quickly. The vicar's life depends on it." As they left the crypt, Poirot's mind raced. The old mill. It was the perfect hiding place, secluded and forgotten. But time was running out. The order would not hesitate to harm Reverend Whitcomb if they felt threatened. The group moved swiftly through the village, their footsteps silent on the cobblestone streets. The old mill loomed in the distance, its broken windows and crumbling walls a stark contrast to the idyllic village. Poirot signalled for the others to wait as he approached the entrance, his senses on high alert. Inside, the mill was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay. Poirot moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the shadows. Then he heard it, a faint groan coming from the far corner of the room. He hurried over, his heart pounding. There, bound and gagged, was Reverend Whitcomb. His face was bruised, his clothes torn, but his eyes lit up with relief when he saw Poirot. Monsieur Poirot, he croaked as Poirot removed the gag. Thank God you've come. Poirot untied the ropes, his hands steady. We must leave. Quickly, monsieur. The order will return soon. But before they could move, a voice rang out from the shadows. I'm afraid it's too late for that. Poirot turned to see Mr. Harold Grimes and Mr. Thomas Blythe stepping into the light, their faces grim. Behind them were several other villagers, their eyes filled with malice. You should have left well enough alone, Poirot, Grimes said, his voice cold. Now you've forced our hand. Poirot stood, his expression calm but resolute. The game is over, monsieur. The truth will come to light, no matter the cost. Grimes sneered. The truth? The truth is that we are the guardians of a legacy far greater than you can imagine, and we will not let you destroy it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And what of Reverend Whitcomb? Was he not one of you? Blythe stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. He betrayed us. He wanted to expose the order, to reveal the treasure to the world. We couldn't allow that. Poirot's gaze swept the room, taking in the faces of the villagers. And so you resorted to kidnapping and intimidation. How noble! Grimes's face flushed with anger. Enough! You're in no position to judge us. Before he could react, Poirot raised his hand, signalling the others. Mrs. Finch, Clara, and the trusted villagers stepped into the room, their faces determined. It is you who are outnumbered, monsieur, Poirot said, his voice steady. Surrender now, and this can end peacefully. For a moment the room was tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. Then, with a frustrated growl, Grimes dropped his weapon. Blythe and the others followed suit, their expressions filled with defeat. Poirot turned to Reverend Whitcomb, who was now standing with Clara's support. Monsieur, the true treasure, what is it? The vicar smiled faintly. Is not gold or jewels, Monsieur Poirot. It is knowledge, an ancient manuscript that holds the secrets of the order. I hid it beneath the oldest tree in the churchyard, where no one would think to look. Poirot's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Then let us retrieve it, monsieur. The truth deserves to be known. As the order members were led away, Poirot stood in the doorway of the mill, his mind at ease. The mystery was solved, the truth revealed. But as he looked out at the village of Little Whimsy, he knew that its secrets would linger, waiting for the next curious mind to uncover them. Chapter 11. The Aftermath. The village of Little Whimsy awoke to a new dawn, but the events of the previous night had left an indelible mark. The arrest of Mr. Harold Grimes, Mr. Thomas Blythe, and several other members of the Order of the Silver Cross had sent shockwaves through the community. The once quiet village was now abuzz with whispers and speculation, its idyllic facade shattered. Hercule Poirot stood in the churchyard, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed at the ancient oak tree. Beneath its gnarled roots lay the true treasure, the ancient manuscript Reverend Whitcomb had hidden so carefully. The vicar, now free and recovering from his ordeal, had insisted on retrieving it himself. With the help of a few trusted villagers, the manuscript was unearthed, its pages fragile and yellowed with age. Poirot carefully examined it, his eyes scanning the intricate script and diagrams. It was indeed a treasure. not of gold or jewels, but of knowledge. The secrets of the order, their rituals and their history were all laid bare within its pages. This, Poirot said, holding up the manuscript, is what they sought to protect. But knowledge, monsieur, is meant to be shared, not hidden. Reverend Whitcomb nodded, his expression solemn. You are right, Monsieur Poirot. The truth must come to light, no matter how painful it may be. As the villagers gathered in the churchyard, Poirot addressed them, his voice calm but firm. The mystery of Reverend Whitcomb's disappearance has been solved, but the scars it has left will take time to heal. Let this be a lesson to us all, that secrets, no matter how well hidden, will always find their way to the surface. The tunes, villagers listened in silence, their faces a mixture of relief and guilt. For some, the revelations had brought closure. For others, they had exposed uncomfortable truths about their neighbours and themselves. Mrs. Abigail Finch approached Poirot, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Without you, we might never have known the truth. Poirot inclined his head. It is my duty, madam. But remember, the true strength of a community lies in its ability to face the truth and move forward together. Clara. Whitcomb stood beside her uncle, her arm linked with his. What will happen to the manuscript? She asked. Poirot smiled faintly. It will be preserved and studied, mademoiselle. Its secrets will be shared with the world, as they should be. As the villagers dispersed, Poirot took a moment to reflect. The case had been one of the most complex he had ever encountered, but it had also been one of the most rewarding. The truth had prevailed, and justice had been served. Reverend Whitcomb approached him, his hand extended. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You have given us a second chance. Poirot shook his hand, warmly. It is you, monsieur, who have shown great courage. I have no doubt that little Whimsy will emerge stronger from this ordeal. With a final glance at the village, Poirot turned and made his way to the train station. His work here was done, but the world was full of mysteries waiting to be solved. As the train pulled away from the station, he leaned back in his seat, a faint smile playing on his lips. The village of Little Whimsy faded into the distance, but its secrets would linger in his mind, a reminder of the power of truth and the enduring legacy of Hercule Poirot. And so concludes Hercule Poirot and the Vanishing Vicar mystery, the holy disappearance that shocked the village. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you'd like any further adjustments or additional details, feel free to let me know.